And so it's no surprise to me that when you look back in the 19th century, the British were building schools and universities and training the children of the elite, and then bringing them to London and to Oxford and to Cambridge and training them up and sending them back. And now if you look at Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Cornell and MIT, thousands upon thousands of the children of the elites of the third world have been coming and being trained and going home and taking back lessons about what is economics, what is society, what should be the natural, reasonable, practical ways of doing things. And where do they learn this? They come as 18 years old. I mean, they're already mostly alienated from their own society, and then they are taught by people that they look up to, because these are people that have conquered them. And so they must have the answer. And Gandhi again captures this very famously in an early passage in his autobiography, where he tells the story about how when he was a kid in school, the kids would sing a little song about, "Behold the mighty Englishman. He is 4 cubits tall. He rules the Indian small because he eats meat." And this was seen to be the secret. That there's some magic bullet, some kind of knowledge about the world, some kind of talisman, something that they have that we don't, and if we had it, we could be like them, and we wouldn't be where we are. And so for lots of people, education, ideas, etc., play that role. But at the same time, look who goes to England in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Mohandas Gandhi. And they teach him about law. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and they teach him about law. Mr. Nehru goes off to study science. But they went back to India, and instead they became leaders of struggles for independence. And this pattern actually happens over and over and over again, that when you look at leaders of key nationalist struggles, they go to the metropole, to the people who conquered them and colonized them, and then go home with a whole set of critical ideas about what's possible and what's not, what's right and what's wrong. So, these to me are examples and instances of possibility and hope. That what may appear at one level to be an institution and an instrument of oppression and empire also has within it the capacity of being turned around. Right? And part of the struggle of undoing empire is to find that space and try and turn these institutions around and figure out what to do about them. Because to pretend that they're not there is a big mistake. Because that's to let them go on doing what they're doing. And to take them on and try and overthrow them is an unreasonable and slightly romantic notion of our own power. Right? It's okay to be utopian, but not to be reckless. So you have to deal with the institutions that we find and figure out how to work and turn them as best we can. So, within what imperialism creates, it creates spaces and ways of people to move and to think and to share that can actually be a fundamental part of the process of undoing it. So the notion that somehow you have to erase empire, that there's nothing that is of any use in it, right? That it has no value in and of itself, right? All of that is true at one level. But at the other level, as I've tried to say, I think that there are important things that we can learn and that we can put to good use, because empire allows these things to take place. It makes it possible for me to be here, for other people to be here, for us to have this conversation. Because I want to end by being a little more specific about the nature of the American empire. It's, despite all the things I've said about empire, this is very different from previous empires. It's an empire, but it's different. One fundamental difference is that this is an empire which is in an advanced capitalist society and economy. It's not struggling to make a transition to capitalism. It's not like the Romans or the Spanish or the Portuguese that made their empire grow and sustain it by plunder and pillage and loot. Or like the British Empire, which was struggling to create industrialization. An empire and building empire helped make that industrialization possible in fundamental ways. I mean, the bill for the Industrial Revolution was paid for by the slave trade in part. But this is a capitalist empire, and capitalism and empire don't necessarily have a happy relationship, because capitalism is enormously disruptive of all kinds of institutions. It's not an easy beast to control. It eats itself and those who think they are its masters. So you have to think about that. You know, empire may think that it rules the world, but capital also has its own logic, which is not territorial. It doesn't respect national boundaries. It doesn't necessarily reflect national interests. So no matter what Bush says in the national security of the United States, American capital has its own interests, which don't necessarily always coincide with those of those who sit in the Pentagon. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And you have to pay attention to when they do and pay attention to when they don't. Secondly, this is a society which is an empire where its citizens, for the first time in any empire, are overwhelmingly educated and literate. At the height of the British Empire, say under Queen Victoria, there was not even universal primary education in Britain. It may have had an empire on which the sun never set, but large proportions of Englishmen and women couldn't read. Whereas this is not true in the case of the United States. So Englishmen and women at one level could say they didn't know about what the empire was actually doing. We don't have that. And because of the globalization of communications, you know, the World Wide Web and lots of other things, we are in near real-time contact with the practice of empire. That changes things about how entangled we are with knowing about what's going on in ways that no empire has ever had before. But you have to recognize that this aspect of what we know about what's going on in the world makes this different from other empires. And the last thing is, this is the first empire which already has built into it democratic institutions. Because at the height of the British Empire, at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, democratic institutions were struggling to be built. People were struggling to organize trade unions. They were struggling to create parties that would recognize the aspirations of ordinary people for some kind of domestic social justice, education, health, etc., etc. Now, democratic institutions, no matter how warped and twisted and unproductive and non-performing they may be, at least they are there. And this is something that no empire before has had. And so, you know, in these ways, these are actually things that one has to pay attention to rather than say, well, you know, that's empire. An empire is empire is empire. At one level it is, but this is very different. We don't know what these things will mean in the practice of contesting empire, because no one's had to do this way before, under these circumstances. So I want to end by saying we're actually at a stage of the need for radical experiments. Because we don't know what will work, because we've never been in this circumstance before. You can't trust necessarily existing institutions, but you can't abandon them either, because they have within them these contradictions built in. And so what do you do? And the answer, I think, is to borrow the title of Gandhi's autobiography and have experiments in truth. See what works, no matter how kooky it may seem at first start, right? Because we don't know where these overlapping contradictions and complementarities will play themselves out. You trust your best judgment, you give it your best shot, but it is a journey into the dark. And for that, it requires a lot of courage to step out from what is familiar. You know the political party, you know your community group, you know this, you know your trade union, but we're going to have to stake out new territory, and for that we have to take risks. And who am I to tell you what risk you should take? That's a conversation that we need to have about what risks we're willing to take together, because the collective risk we face is that this may not be the first global empire, this may be the last global empire, because in its falling it will take us all down with it, because unlike any previous empire, it has the capacity to end the world. Thank you.